Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my running back strength of schedule for the rest of the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the running back position, but also matchups for the rest of the fantasy football season to kind of give you guys a perspective on which running backs really, truly have the easiest matchups going forward and are probably going to be the most successful. So to kind of give you guys some perspective on potentially players you should go out and trade for, we're going to be talking about exactly that today. Before we begin today's video, let me remind all of you, if you haven't yet already, join the community, click that subscribe button, get that cursor past cornerback Stephon Gilmore, click the subscribe button, click the bell notification button to be notified on my latest content coming out, and also don't forget to click the like button on today's video. All right, guys. Hey, everybody. So if you're familiar and you've been around the channel for quite some time, you'll know that the thing to the left of me is pretty common in almost every single one of my videos because we do talk about matchups very often. So to the left of me, for those of you who are new, potentially, this is how much defenses are giving to opposing running backs on a weekly basis thus far this season on average in half-point PPR scoring format. So for example, the Miami Dolphins are giving up to opposing running backs nearly 35 fantasy points per game on average in half PPR, while on the very bottom, the San Francisco 49ers are allowing the least amount of points to opposing running backs. Only, what is that? Is that 11? Goodness gracious, that's a small number. Is it 11, 13? I can't even tell. Let's go ahead and look at this. 11.1. There you go. Fantasy points on average to opposing running backs. So to kind of give you guys some perspective, this offseason, I did something similar to this when we talked about strength of schedules before the season. I did my calculations. I also looked at calculations from fantasypros.com and also Pro Football Focus, and we kind of just went over that and talked about exactly which running backs could potentially have the best strength of schedule going into 2019. So now that we've actually collected some data and we've had about 6 weeks of production from all of these teams around the National Football League, it gives us a better idea of where these teams stand defensively and where their running back position kind of stand. Well, there's some players that we thought were going to be breakouts or potentially win their backfield. They're no longer there. So I want to talk about exactly that. I want to talk about how specific running backs going into weeks 7 and on are going to have far more advantageous matchups that you should be buying in on to potentially help you win a fantasy championship this year. I also often say that the luckiest among us are often the most prepared. So we're trying to prepare for the long run. We're not just trying to make playoffs. Some of us may have started slow. Maybe you just gotten the injury bug, or you just ended up playing against the best team every single week. Yes, those teams, we're going to still try to make the playoffs. But for those of us who are sitting nice and tidy, we're trying to make a championship run this year, and this is going to hopefully help you guys out. So to kind of give you some perspective, what was I able to do? Taking the calculations of how much teams were giving up to opposing running backs on a weekly basis and the rest of season schedule from weeks 7 to 16. We're not counting week 17 because you should not be playing a championship game there. These were the rest of season strength of schedules at the running back position. So on the left, on the very left, that is the rest of season strength of schedule from week 7 to 16. The Minnesota Vikings and Dalvin Cook, one of, if not the best running backs in the NFL right now in fantasy football, has the easiest schedule. And on the very bottom, Alvin Kamara, Latavius Murray combination, on average, have the toughest schedule going forward. But we're going to talk about each of these teams a little bit in detail, mainly the top teams and the bottom teams, because I think there are some discrepancies that, sure, some of these stats don't take account for. These are just flat numbers on how much opposing defenses are allowing, and I just wanted to get a little bit of a perspective. Now, to the right of that, in between me and the very left, we have the playoff strength of schedule and which teams in the playoffs for the fantasy football season, weeks 14, 15, and 16, have extremely advantageous matchups. Obviously, you can see the Vikings and the Jets, both teams that are in the top 3 of both of these categories. Dalvin Cook, Le'Veon Bell, rest of season, these guys are extremely valuable. And often, it's pretty probable that your team either already has these guys or it's going to be extremely difficult to trade for them. So then again, we're going to talk about some other guys that also have really advantageous matchups going forward. So really quickly, I want to focus in on a couple of these guys. Excuse me. Oh, man, that was weird. And kind of give you guys some perspective on exactly what kind of streaks that we're going to see in the next coming weeks that really are helpful. There's 9 games for the Minnesota Vikings coming up. Sure, they have a bye week coming, but to kind of give you some perspective on just how easy it is, let's take a look really quickly. All right, so I've got 3 players here. Now, these were the 3 running backs from the 3 respective teams the Minnesota Vikings, the New York Jets, and the Buffalo Bills, who all three had the easiest strength of schedules at the running back position going forward for the rest of the season in half-point PPR scoring format. So let's look at Dalvin Cook on the very left. Going forward, from week 7 on, look at the green, playing against Detroit, Washington, Kansas City, who cannot stop a soul on the ground, Dallas, Denver. Then they get a bye week, coming back, playing against Seattle. Sure, that's fine, but look at what Nick Chubb just did yesterday against them. Then you get to play against Detroit, the Los Angeles Chargers, who are a complete mess, and then you finish off the year with the Green Bay Packers. All teams that are giving up a ton of points to opposing running backs thus far this season, and I don't think that's going to change. We've seen a great sample size of these defenses, and an offense like the Minnesota Vikings, who are so run heavy and want to dictate the game with Dalvin Cook, then play action. I really do believe Dalvin Cook rests the season. If you don't already have him, try to get him on roster because he's going to be carrying teams going forward. I understand that's a tough ask to try to tell you, hey, go and grab Dalvin Cook after 6 weeks of production, considering he's been so good, but maybe someone wants to sell. You never know. Anyway, moving on. Le'Veon Bell of the New York Jets. Yes, the New York Jets have already passed their bye week. It was in week 4. So the next 10 games coming up. Sure, week 7 is a difficult matchup against the New England Patriots. That is for certain. That's not going to be a walk in the park. But after that, you get Jacksonville, Miami, the Giants, the Washington Redskins, the Oakland Raiders, Cincinnati, Miami again, Baltimore, and Pittsburgh. I mean, holy moly. These are really, really easy stretches of schedules. Playing Miami twice is already fantastic, but then you get to play against the Giants, the Redskins, and the Cincinnati Bengals, who all three of them are in the bottom half of this league in terms of defense and teams in general. A lot of these teams, by that time, are going to be looking to tank, and Le'Veon Bell's going to be running all over them. And I'm also excited about that Week 16 matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. That is going to be a fun one for sure. I mean, oh man, that's going to be exciting. Moving on, Devin Singletary. Look at the green beans. I've been saying it for the last couple weeks. The Buffalo Bills have an incredible stretch from week 16 to 13. I mean, at every position. And that's why I've been such a, I've been so confident in suggesting Devin Singletary, Frank Gore as pickups because of the fact that, look at this. Miami, sure, Philadelphia is great against stopping the run. But then you get to play against Washington, Cleveland, Miami, Denver, Dallas. I mean, that stretch of schedule just seems far too easy to pass up on, especially on a guy that maybe you could pick up off the waivers. So I just wanted to go in and show you that. Let's talk about some other guys that were at the top. The Raiders, the Giants, and the Steelers. 3 teams that have extremely favorable matchups going forward. We want to focus in on these guys. Why? Josh Jacobs coming off a 27.8 point performance in London against the Bears defense of all defenses, had a bye week and is coming off of a bye week to have a 10-game stretch of just running all over teams, and that's exactly what he's going to do. He's going to break records and he's going to break ankles. Oh my goodness, you get to play against Green Bay, who will probably be on a shorter week because they play the Monday night matchup. Houston, Detroit, Chargers, Bengals, Jets, Kansas City, Tennessee, Jacksonville, and the Chargers again. Honestly, again, these are really easy matchups. Same thing with Saquon. If you're a Saquon owner and you are able to hold on to him, put him on your bench, put him on an IR slot, the next coming weeks are extremely favorable. Arizona, sure, they give up the 24th most points. That's not good. That means that they are stout against the run. That is not the case. It is because their secondary is so bad that Arizona has kind of hidden their bad run-stopping defense. So as of right now, again, that's another good option. Moving on in their schedule, Detroit, Dallas. I mean, look at this. Just green beans. Getting into the fantasy playoffs. Weeks 13, 14, 15, and 16. We've seen Saquon destroy the Eagles before. That is not out of the realm of possibility. And I think Saquon Barkley could be winning some fantasy championships in the fantasy playoffs as long as those teams can get there. So you might want to go and look for a Saquon team. Maybe they're struggling. Maybe you can offer a trade if he doesn't come back this week. And then the last team I really wanted to kind of go over, James Conner. Going to have a bye week after a monster performance himself. Comes back to Miami, and then just a bunch of, it's just green. You get to play in-division matchups against the Cleveland and Cincinnati Bengals. It looks like Oh my goodness, guys. All right, really quickly. Before we leave, I want to focus on two more guys. These two teams have extremely favorable fantasy playoff matchups, okay? Now, sure, David Montgomery's got a bunch of green going his way, but in the fantasy playoffs, 14, 15, 16, fantastic. Same thing with Sony Michel and the New England Patriots. At that time, this team's going to have a lot of wins under their belt, but they're going to be playing against Kansas City, which they're going to run all over, Cincinnati, which they're going to run all over, and again with Buffalo, which they're going to try to run all over. Buffalo's a better defense, but still another favorable matchup for Sony Michel potentially. All right, so to kind of give you guys some perspective, thank you for hanging in there. We just wanted to go over some players that really had some favorable matchups. Now we can click on over back to who was projected to have the best strength of schedule for the rest of the season. So we went over the Vikings, the Jets, the Bills, the Raiders, the Giants, the Steelers, the Bears, and the Patriots, right? The top 8 teams there. Obviously, the significant margin between, let's say, the Patriots and the Browns rest of season from week 7 to 16 isn't too big of a difference, right? On average, the teams that they're playing against in terms of difficulty, it's not that big of a margin. But the teams that I kind of wanted to focus on going forward are some teams that are on the bottom half. Because truly, I do believe this way of determining a player's value isn't exactly the way you want to do it. Sure, we've seen, Dalvin Cook, Le'Veon Bell, and whoever's going to be that starting running back for the Bills, and then Josh Jacobs, those guys are going to be torching teams in the coming weeks. Hopefully Saquon can come back early enough so where he can do the same as well. We know that for certain. We've looked at those schedules. Those teams are not capable of stopping run-heavy teams, which these are, right? So I want to look at the teams at the bottom half because I don't believe Alvin Kamara, Chris Carson, David Johnson, Devontae Freeman, Ezekiel Elliott down there, Christian McCaffrey, those teams on the very bottom, I do not believe those are guys that you want to avoid. You absolutely want those guys on roster. Sure, they might have more difficult matchups, but they are better running backs and they are on better teams. Now, obviously, I'm not saying at all this schedule or the strength of schedule does not determine whether or not I'm playing a guy. That is not the case. I want Zeke's, I want McCaffrey's, I want Kamara's on my team. And I really do believe we have to kind of look at their strength of schedule and see exactly why there is a little bit of discrepancy. Why is New Orleans, why is the NFC South such a difficult division? Because we have the Saints down here, we have the Falcons down here, and we have the Panthers down here. Sure, we have the Buccaneers at 21, but what makes it so much more difficult for these NFC South teams for the running back position? And you've got 2 of the top 3, in my opinion, Kamara and McCaffrey down here, which makes it an interesting prospect. And then obviously you got Devontae Freeman, who's been having some great weeks that he's strung together, 4 double-digit fantasy point weeks in the last 4 weeks in half PPR. But anyway, I want to go ahead and let's look at really quickly what exactly is making the NFC South a more controversial division, I'd say, rest of season schedule. So above me, what we're going to see is the rest of season schedule for those 4 teams. And I've always been, since the beginning of the season, a big proponent that after week 10, this division is going to light on fire. It's going to light itself on fire, and we are going to see 30-point shootouts from both teams on a weekly basis. So to give you guys some ideas of what I'm thinking, okay? Look at these stretches, right? We have from weeks 10 through 15 for the Saints. They get to play against the Falcons, the Buccaneers, the Panthers, the Falcons, the 49ers, and the Colts, right? That is a great schedule. Now, why exactly is this so difficult for Alvin Kamara? Why is the strength of schedule comparatively so difficult, for example? I personally believe, obviously, the 49ers are the best defensively against the running back, but the Falcons, the Buccaneers, and the Panthers, they're not great defenses. We have seen it. Sure, the Panthers have been getting after it as of late, but the Buccaneers and the Falcons aren't great defenses. What I expect to see is that once Drew Brees comes back, okay, these are going to be shootouts. And yes, these teams maybe get torched in their secondary, but it does not mean Alvin Kamara is not going to be successful. A lot of these teams, like the Falcons, the Buccaneers, and the Panthers, they get torched over the top. Their secondaries are not great. But on the ground, because of the fact that teams often have to score heavily in order to win these games, it pretty much disappears. The running back position playing against these teams evaporates. Their value disappears. So kind of giving you some perspective, I do not believe Alvin Kamara is not going to have a great strength of schedule going into the playoffs, because he is going to. They're going to be so-called more difficult, but they're really not. They're actually more favorable than you expect. Also, moving into the Carolina Panthers for McCaffrey. I mean, playing against the Falcons, the Saints, the Redskins, the Falcons, and the Seahawks and Colts, those aren't difficult matchups, especially once you get Cam back and you have the ability to run some read option with him, have an extra threat out there. I do believe this offense gets better, and in these matchups, a lot of high-scoring affairs and a lot of fantasy points to be had. Moving on to the Buccaneers, sure, the Buccaneers running back situation's a mess, but they do have a great schedule. I don't think it's that bad. It's really not that difficult. Same thing with the Falcons. The Falcons get to play against, in a 5-week stretch from weeks 10 to 14, against all NFC South teams, and those are always been shootouts, and they're going to continue to be. And with Devontae Freeman getting as much work as he has in the passing game, being more and more implemented in this offense, looking more and better, he is a nice option going forward. Just wanted to go ahead, go over that so that everyone can understand that even though on this page, calculated for the rest of the season, those teams are going to technically struggle at the running back position, that's not always the full truth or story of the situation. Just because those teams have not allowed many points to opposing running backs doesn't mean they're not susceptible of doing so in the future. Just wanted to go over that, kind of give you guys that perspective. So looking at the fantasy playoffs, right? Obviously, like the Bears they've got the easiest schedule on average because there are 3 games in the fantasy playoffs. If you divide the number to the right of the team by 3, that would be the average difficulty of the opposing teams separately. So the Bears would have, be playing against some pretty easy matchups. But do we want to invest in a guy like David Montgomery who hasn't been given full reign? I don't mind it. If he is going to be a guy that is not a starter and a bench contributor to where he can come in on some bye weeks here and there because he's got great favorable matchups and he's eventually going to have full reign of this backfield. There is no more Mike Davis. Yes, the last time we saw him play against the Raiders wasn't a great scenario, but if Trubisky can come back and this offense can get towards a better offensive scheme and they can at least consistently run the ball, we could see something there. But in terms of who we really want, in terms of trade targets, I mean, obviously, Cook and Bell. I don't know if you can freely go get them. That is not a certainty, but I would absolutely suggest you try to do so. On top of that, you see the Browns are the number 9 spot on both spots. A lot of teams are going to be worried about, potentially Nick Chubb in this offense. Kareem Hunt is always an available option, guys. You can get a piece of that offense in the coming weeks here as a waiver wire pickup. I think he comes off of his suspension in the bye week. They do have their bye week now, right? So he's serving a 8-game suspension, so he will be back. Was it 8 or 9 games? Maybe 10. He should be back, I think, week 9 or 10, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe it's 11. I'm not sure. I know he had hernia surgery prior to the season starting, but hopefully he'll be back by then. But either way, you could get a little piece of that backfield there as well. Cincinnati Bengals don't really want to touch Joe Mixon. The Eagles have some pretty favorable matchups. Now the question is, we've seen Miles Sanders, especially yesterday, get a lot of work in the passing game, and that's typically where he's been getting it. And since week 2, in terms of targets and receptions, Miles Sanders is up there with all running backs in the National Football League. The guy's been getting a lot of work in the passing game. Darren Sproles has pretty much disappeared, so it's Howard and him. Which one of those do you want to invest in going forward, etc. Just kind of giving you guys some perspective on what kind of matchups are going for always. Even the Arizona Cardinals, right? They're on the bottom because I did talk about the team surrounding them, Arizona Cardinals and the Seahawks. Like David Johnson's a wide receiver. He really isn't a running back. Sure, he's going to run the ball a couple times a game, 10, 12 times. But on top of it, he is going to spread out wide and he's going to be a lot of contributions, receiving, receptions, PPR. He's not just a running back. So sure, he might have difficult matchups for the running back position, but he's such a diverse running back that has so much capabilities around the field and they move him around so often, his value just continues to go up. Chris Carson, sure, he's a guy that, they're going to feed the ball 25 times to. He's going to be able to batter teams and he's going to be able to run them over. He's continued to do so for the last 3 weeks. I'm not worried about these kind of guys at all. So to kind of give you some perspective, hopefully this helps you guys out. For the running back position for the strength of schedule going forward. Listen, a lot of this going forward, you have to just go and see which matchups or which fantasy playoffs you want to invest in, right? The Denver Broncos right there. The Denver Broncos sitting at 12, rest of season schedule, sitting at 4 for the fantasy playoffs, right? Philip Lindsay this week, gets to run all over them. I mean, the Kansas City Chiefs. He's going to have a fantastic game. You'll see tomorrow. He's going to be tomorrow's thumbnail because Phillip Lindsay is going to take over. Phillip Lindsay is showing us some glimpses here and there, but as soon as he continues to tear up opposing defenses, sure, Royce Freeman's there, but that's not a backfield that I'm not afraid of that investing in that kind of a backfield going forward. Marlin Mack, a guy that's coming off a bye week, a lot of people are silent on him, not listening very often. This is a guy that can carry you. Also, maybe this Chargers offensive line, they may be bad, but maybe we want to invest while these cheap pieces of the Chargers are potentially up for grabs. Melvin Gordon, Austin Eckler, these are guys, potentially I want Gordon more, but these are guys that are going to be on discount because they haven't played well as of late. Anyway, just wanted to give you guys some perspective because, again, the luckiest ones among us are often the most prepared. So hopefully this helps you prepare for the rest of the season, kind of gives you guys some perspective. Thank you again for watching, guys. If you like today's video, click that like button because if you do so, and I hear a lot of noise and you guys like this video, then we can do it for the wide receiver position going forward in this week to kind of give you guys a little bit of understanding on who really have the best matchups going forward. It really is the Jets and the Buffalo Bills. Their entire team is going to be incredible. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. I appreciate you spending your time with me today. Tomorrow will be the running back starter sits for the 2019 season for week 7. So be sure to check that out tomorrow. But until then, hopefully you can go and win your fantasy game tonight if it is pending on the Green Bay Packers-Lions game. Thank you again for watching, and if you haven't yet already, subscribe to the channel, click that like button, click the bell notification button, and also if you haven't checked out my Patreon link is down in the description for those of you trying to get all of your 2019 fantasy football questions answered. Unlimited questions, $5 a month, 2 private live streams, a bunch of content there. Thank you everybody for watching today, and until tomorrow, I will see you guys. Peace.